Hello and welcome to another lesson of APUS history. Today we're going to be tackling part of topic 2.6, slavery in the British colonies. We're going to be talking about the shift from indentured servitude. So our main goal is to address this learning objective, explain the causes and effects of slavery in the various British colonial regions. But one aspect of this objective comes here in part A. It says, all the British colonies participated to varying degrees in the Atlantic slave trade due to the abundance of land and a growing European demand for colonial goods, as well as a shortage of indentured servants. So that's the part of the learning objective and the key concepts that we're going to be tackling in this lesson. Continue to watch my future videos on more particular aspects of the transatlantic slave trade. So here's your outline. We're going to briefly address forced labor and then talk about indentured servitude and finally end with Bacon's Rebellion. So labor systems in the English colonies, as far as forced unpaid labor goes, there were three types or three groups affected. So there were the indentured servants, which began right away in Jamestown, American Indians who were enslaved soon after, and then finally the Africans that arrived in 1619. So in the 1600s, the labor systems are going to be more fluid than what we think about as far as American forced labor goes. We really start to see the laws regarding labor begin closer to the 1700s. So in those early years in the 1600s, there just wasn't quite as many rigid classifications to determine the status of slaves and servants. Indentured servitude is a term that you definitely need to know, and it's the system where a person agrees to labor for a period, and this is typically going to be for 4 to 7 years, and they agree to do this because another person is going to pay for their passage from Europe to the Americas. And once they arrive in the Americas, then they will also have room and board. And then when they complete their contract of indenture, then they will gain freedom and freedom dues. And those freedom dues could vary. It could be wages, it could be land, it could be apprenticeship, it could be a variety of things. And they worked in a variety of settings, most dependent on the colonial region. So in the Chesapeake and Southern region, if there were indentured servants there, they likely would have been agricultural laborers, whereas they may have worked more in the towns in the New England colonies, for example. Now, another thing to note here is that the indentured servitude system was part of what's the broader term for the headright system. And additionally, indentured servants who often 50% approximately did not survive to the end of their contract. So they were not well taken care of. They often were succumbed to disease, starvation, exposure, all kinds of things like that. So about 50% survived. And then of those 50% that made it to the end of their indenture period, only about 50% actually received their freedom dues. So out of the total, only about 25% are actually getting what they signed up for. So here is a letter from a indentured servant, Richard Freethorn. If you've seen my previous video on the Chesapeake colonies, it's you've seen this there. But basically, he's writing home to his mother and father, and it's such a sad letter where he is discussing how horrible it is to be an indentured servant. And you can pause and read it fully so that you really get a sense of it. But in his last line, he says, "Oh, that they were in England without their limbs. I would not care to lose any limb to be in England again." So basically, I would give up my arms and my legs to be back in England again. So being an indentured servant in the American colonies or in the English colonies was a very horrible experience for the most part. All right, so moving on here to our third point, Bacon's Rebellion. And I'll link this in how it applies to indentured servitude soon. But this is a rebellion that's going to happen in Jamestown, Virginia. And so what is happening in this area is that there is self-government, there is an assembly, and it's controlled by Governor William Berkeley. And he established a very rigid social hierarchy where he said the elite planters at the top, not only are they wealthy, but they also are going to control the government. And so it is going to keep the wealth and the profits up to a small group of people in his inner circle, and the rest of the community will struggle. So there's a large group of poor white colonists, a large group of indentured servants, a large group of enslaved Africans, and when indentured servants in particular are going to complete the term of their service, they are going to have to get land further west from the ports, and it's going to be much closer to the land controlled by American Indians. And so there's going to be somewhat frequent attacks in those regions. So the colonists living there are going to ask Governor Berkeley for protection, which he will refuse to do. So in 1676, the economy was struggling, and there's going to be violence that erupts. So one group of Indians is going to attack, I believe it's this guy, Thomas Matthew or something, and they're going to attack his farm. And in response, Thomas Matthew and a few others are actually going to retaliate against the wrong American Indian tribe. And so Nathaniel Bacon is going to organize a militia to attack the American Indians, launch a full-scale revolt against any and all American Indians, try to kill them indiscriminately. And he's going to ask again Berkeley to support, which he will refuse. And so really what's happening here is the rebels are demanding equal treatment, equal protection from the governor, and they're asking for the right to kill American Indians and steal their land. So Nathaniel Bacon is going to end up being arrested by Berkeley. And upon his release, he issues this declaration against Berkeley, where he's going to list these grievances, these issues that he has with the way that Berkeley is running the Virginia Company or the Virginia colony. And he's going to say that he has raised unjust taxes. He'd advanced only the interests of a few favorite people. He has assumed a monopoly on the beaver trade. He has protected American Indians. And for these reasons, he is guilty, and they require that Berkeley surrender himself, and if not, he will be considered a traitor. So he issues this declaration, and then he and his followers go on to attack the House of Burgesses. That's where the government was located, and burned down Jamestown. Now, what's interesting here is that he is also going to promise freedom to any enslaved Africans who participate in this rebellion. And so Berkeley then calls the English for help. The English send 1,000 troops. And as the reinforcements come, Bacon is going to end up dying of dysentery, and there's no real leader of the rebellion anymore. And so some of the followers are going to surrender, but 23 of the leaders are going to end up being hanged. So mass violence is occurring here. So why is this significant? It's considered to be a turning point in colonial history because the wealthy landowners begin to fear uprisings from indentured servants. These class difficulties, the differences between the wealthy and the poor, become so apparent that the white landowners start to believe it's just going to be more simple to enslave Africans who they will be able to control with more violent methods than what they are allowed to do against fellow white Europeans. It's also the arrival of the British in the area is going to lead to the reduced power for American Indians. So really the significance here, what you should know about Bacon's Rebellion, is that it illustrated the instability of early colonial life, especially between social classes, and hastened the end of the system of indentured servitude. So let's take a look at this graph here. Here you can see the line with the dark circles is going to be the number of indentured servants in one specific county. And then the squares are going to demonstrate the number of enslaved persons. So you can see in 1680 here is where we see the last time that the number of indentured servants is more than the number of enslaved persons. And Bacon's Rebellion happened in 1676. So there's a variety of reasons for this large shift to slavery. Number one, American Indians were being killed by diseases, and many were traveling westward out of the area of European encroachment on their lands. Conflicts like King Philip's War, if you remember from lesson 2.5, that also led to many American Indians being killed, being sold into slavery, or moving westward. The pool of indentured servants is going to wane after 1660. For some, part of this reason is going to be because of letters like Richard Freethorn, letters that come home and describe how awful of how awful of an experience it is. Less people are going to desire to come to the New World as a result of things like that. And then the effects of Bacon's Rebellion, where planters are going to decide, it's not worth it for us to pay for indentured servants. It is more worth it to purchase enslaved Africans. So for all of these reasons, we see a large shift to slavery. So looking back at our learning objective, where you want to explain the causes and effects of slavery in the various British colonial regions, this kind of touches on those causes. So you should understand why the American colonies, the English colonies, shifted away from indentured servitude. And Bacon's Rebellion is just a really good piece of evidence to explain that part of it. Keep watching my next video to understand more of those causes and effects of slavery. But I hope that this video was helpful, and if so, please like and subscribe.